Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. The streak continues. And now, for the first time in a decade in the continuity of the streak, we get Undertaker challenging for a world title at WrestleMania. And of course, of the two, this is the vastly better match, even though Batista, his opponent, and the defending world champion going into it, did not have as long of a career as Psycho Sid. I'd say he got a better match out of Taker at Mania. But I think that's more because their styles mesh better. Of course, this is the match from WrestleMania 23. Went about 15 minutes and 50 seconds. It was in front of around 80,000 fans at Ford Field in Detroit, Michigan. It took place on April 1st, 2007. April Fool's Day. With that, I'm actually surprised they didn't try to do a whole false thing of the streak ending and then be like, oh no, my mistake, considering the day. But I guess they figured, yeah, we won't do that with Taker. Now, if it was in more recent years, I know Vince probably would have had a field day if he had decided not to do that. It'd be like, well, we got to really get the fans into it and got to get them excited about it and make them think something happened that didn't happen, pal. I know some of my fellow fans would probably be like, if only that happened the night the streak actually ended. Oh, once I get there, that should be interesting. We had Michael Cole and JBL on commentary, and they really built up the importance of a world title match at WrestleMania. And even though it wasn't the main event of the evening, because it was match number 5 out of 9, they were still building up the importance, which is nice. And considering it's Taker in a world title match, it makes you wonder why it wasn't later on the card. But considering that Cena was in the other world title match, and the other big match involved Vince and Donald on the outside, you could see why it was placed here. They had to put it far enough in the card to where it's important, but then not to where it gets overshadowed by the other matches. So it's at the appropriate place. Although personally, in retrospect, probably would have been better if they switched the Taker match and the Cena matches spots. But it's still fine where it is. And plus, backstage after the match, Batista reportedly went up to some of the other people and were like, beat that. Hey, gotta give it to him. He knows his worth. Now, some of the backstory for this match is that Taker got this title shot by winning his first Royal Rumble, which I can tell you, since this was around near the end of the height of my fandom, which was from 02 to around 09, 010. This is like around a couple years before it ended, the height of it. I was really excited for it because I've been watching Taker since he was the American Badass, seeing him transform back into the OG Dead Man, and then plod along until here. It's like, ooh, this should be fun. And like a lot of my fellow fans, I was invested, like, which one is he going to go with? I was watching all the shows at this point. I saw the episode of Raw where he came out and stared down Cena looking with the blood on his face, and looking like, it's like Cena's looking into his own death. Him calling out Lashley, him calling out Batista, and then the episode where he had all 3 champions in the ring to decide, and then he looks at Batista and does that. And in retrospect, that's, even though we got a good match out of it, as this is, part of me in retrospect wishes he had chosen Cena, because even though we did kind of get that match years later, it was a squash match. You imagine what those two could have done when Undertaker was physically capable, and although Cena was greener, he was a bit younger and could still go with the right opponent. And at the height of Cena's whole big push to where the whole Super Cena thing came from, would have added to the drama. It's like Streak versus Cena's push, like, the fans would have gone into it and be like, are they really going to put Cena over Taker? And more likely, Taker would have still won. But it would add it to the drama of the match instead of like, oh, is Cena going to win or is Taker going to win? And other than it being a Mania, it just feels like another match. Plus, even though it had been only a couple years, those two hadn't touched since Taker had turned back into the American Badass. So it would have been good. But instead, we got this, which is still a pretty good match. I don't know how the Lashley-Taker pairing would have gone, but no one who won the Royal Rumble ever went for the ECW title, which I think is kind of a wasted opportunity. Definitely made that title feel like the lesser of the 3 world titles. You should have at least had one person go for it if you wanted to make that title mean something. But alas, they didn't do it. Taker won the Rumble. He chose Batista. They built up their feud. They did the usual thing where they attacked each other a couple times in between. And the hype package they show building up the feud is actually done pretty well. Teddy Long does the ring announcements. Batista comes out normally. Taker comes out with a simplistic Mania entrance, all things considered, but it fits. He doesn't want to get too grandiose for the world title since it has no stipulation other than whoever wins this match is the world champion. The moment the bell rings, Batista goes for a spear. It's like one of those video games where you set the settings to where you have a finisher saved up right out the bat and you use it automatically. And of course, he doesn't get a pin, obviously. They go back and forth for a bit. Batista does a diving tackle. And Cole on commentary says he's never seen Batista do that, which I don't know if it's accurate. It could be he hasn't done it since he went to SmackDown, but I trust Cole on that. But it could be one of those things where the announcers say something and then the fans are like, I'm a Newton bitter. Taker does a comeback after this. He does his snake eyes and leg drop in the middle of the ring. So we're seeing the typical moves from the wrestlers as they take control. The match is going pretty well. He gets a 2 count out of that. Then he takes things old school and fans go into it, as they always do, which the fans are into the match at this point, but it's later on in the match where they really get into it, and I will note when it is that they get really into it. A little bit after this, Taker goes for a choke slam, but Batista powers out of it, and I just love the way he powers out of it. He gets him in the choke slam, he's like this, but Batista grabs it, and he's really powering out of it. Taker's trying to fight back into it, but it doesn't work. Then they keep going at it, and then after this, Taker sets up for his apron leg drop, his traditional one, and then he does his over-the-top rope dive once things go to the outside, which I think this is the second or third Mania where he's done this, but this is still early on when Taker would do this, but still doesn't make it any less impressive to see a man of Taker's size do it. More so in the time period that this match takes place. Nowadays, it's more commonplace for men of Taker size or larger to do it. I mean, we see Braun Strowman do it a couple times, which I think if they do it all the time, it diminishes the impact of it. Now, of course, seeing Taker doing it in his Mania matches has become routine, but for the last few years, those have usually been his only matches, so it's kind of expected to see it. But for around this time, it became a new version of him walking the top ropes, where people are like, I've never seen a man of his size do that. Still impressive, especially from an athletic perspective. Batista retakes control, and he sends Taker into the timekeeper's area where the chairs are, and then he throws him on the announce table. Takes a while to set up, but he does a running power slam through the SmackDown announce table. You see them all moving out of there. And I'm actually surprised the ref didn't call for a DQ, because usually putting someone through that would be a DQ, but I guess he's given a lot of leeway since this is a world title match and Taker's involved. But it's one of those things where the rules are more guidelines. Or the ref probably like, yeah, technically it's part of the ringside area. It takes them a little bit. They sell it pretty well, more so Taker, but they eventually get back into the ring. And Batista goes for a Batista bomb, but Taker fights out of it. I mean, makes sense. Batista fought out of one of his finishing maneuvers, even though it's a lesser one, so it makes sense he should fight out of Batista's one. And then Batista, a little bit after this, does a belly-to-belly suplex, which it's nice to see him throw in something like that, because Batista doesn't usually do that many suplexes, unlike another wrestler of similar size. And then Batista goes to set up the traditional corner punches, which Taker turns into a last ride. The wily veteran Undertaker, turning an attack into a counterattack. And JBL says something on commentary he says a couple times throughout the match, but this is where he really says it, especially once the near fall from the last ride occurs, and that is, this is a world championship match. Which at this point, it definitely feels like one. You definitely see that both these men want to win, that they both want to walk out of here with the 10 pounds of gold in the form of the big gold belt around their waist. Batista goes for a spine buster. Taker chokeslams for a near fall. It's nice to see him actually hit the chokeslam. A little bit after this, Taker goes for a tombstone. Batista reverses it into a spear. And then he hits a Batista bomb for a 2.5. Now this is where the crowd really starts to get into it. They're with the match before this, but it's at this point where you really notice the volume level from them go up, and you really feel like there's around 80,000 fans in this arena. Because before this, I'm like, this feels just like a normal Mania in front of an average-sized crowd, but here is where it starts to feel like a larger crowd. Which is an aside, the way this whole thing was shot, it doesn't really look like it's a large crowd, but maybe it's because I'm used to more of the wider shots from the later WrestleManias, whereas this one, it feels like they're shooting it like a lot of the normal shows from around this time. Following the kick out from the Batista bomb, the audience is into it. Following Taker's kick out of the Batista bomb, the announcers begin to question, has anyone ever done that? Which, I do wonder that. I'd have to go back and look. But if memory serves me, if anyone had kicked out of the Batista bomb before this, it was few and far between, which is good because you don't want people constantly kicking out of the finisher because then it's like, why is it a finisher? It's just a setup move. It's an average move. You should selectively use it. So here, world title match at Mania, Taker streak on the line. It makes sense for him to be kicking out of the Batista bomb. Because then at least it feels special. It's like, has anyone done that? As the announcers build up. So this is a proper instance of where you should be kicking out of a finishing maneuver. A little bit after this, Batista does a thing that a lot of Taker's opponents want to do. It's like, oh, he kicks out my finisher, I'll give him one of his own. Goes for a tombstone, Taker reverses out of it, but it's not a direct reverse where he just slides back, he sets him up for one of his own. He slides back, gets out of it, then quickly puts him into one of his own. Does the tombstone pile driver. 1, 2, 3. Taker wins the match. The streak is intact. He's now 15-0, and he is now the World Heavyweight Champion. Now, I love the way the referee hands him the title belt after this. He's cautious, like, here you go, Mr. Taker. Once Taker gets it, Taker's just looking at him, and the referee's like out of the ring quickly, like, don't hurt me, Mr. Taker. And Batista gets out of the ring pretty quickly, too, after this. The fans are going wild. Taker does a typical thing where he lifts the belt up in his pose, and Taker is now the champion. For a little bit, anyway. A line that JBL says as Taker's beginning his pose sums up Taker winning in a little bit of his title reign, and that is, the Lord of Darkness is reigning again. And considering JBL has faced Taker in world title matches and was allied with him as a member of the Ministry, he should know. All in all, this is a pretty good match. Definitely feels like a world title match at Mania and an entry in the streak. Doesn't go too long, but match with men of these size, it probably would have felt like it dragged if it was like 5 minutes longer, 10 minutes longer. So 15:50 is the perfect length for it. Now, even though this is the first time watching it, just the build up and seeing the aftermath of it does make me feel nostalgic for this mid-2000s period. And as an aside, from a fan perspective, this was the year where I started having more of an online presence. I mean, I didn't start posting stuff on YouTube, even in small colonies, until the following year, the ending of my senior year. But this is around the time I started getting online, started getting involved in some of the fandoms, started role-playing, and of course, just started putting my foot into the internet wrestling community stuff. It wasn't until, I think, the end of this year, beginning of next year, or even later, that I started reading sites like NoDQ and started becoming more of a quote-unquote smart mark. Because at this point in my fandom, I was smart to the business, but I wasn't like looking up everything, all the terminology. I just knew that wrestling was staged. I'm not going to use the term fake because, like a lot of my fans, I hate that term when applied to wrestling, even though some people think it's apt and think that they're giving you a revelation by saying, oh, by the way, you know wrestling's fake. Makes me think of that one reaction of Arnold from Total Recall. No shit. The reason I prefer using staged over than fake is because the term fake in this context, to me, implies no chance of serious injury for the competitors. And we've seen time and time again that's not the case. Just ask Stone Cold Steve Austin if that feels fake. You'll get something. Just ask Undertaker and all the injuries he's had if that feels fake. Well, and now we're moving on to the match that made Taker 16-0. And that match versus Edge was technically the battle of 2 undefeated streaks. If you guys want to support the channel, we got the PayPal link and the Patreon link below. And until next time, guys.